Hello and welcome to this edition of Assembly Calendar. I'm your host, Matt Visscher. Our guest today is New York State Assemblyman Dean Murray. Dean represents the 3rd Assembly District of Suffolk County. Thank you very much for joining us today. This is the Assemblyman's first show since the 2016 budget was passed in a marathon session, which has become quite typical of Albany standards here and of state government. So we're going to chat with the Assemblyman to get his overall thoughts on the process and then delve into some of the specifics, the hidden pieces of legislation that made it through and the state budget process. Always nice to see you, sir.
Good to see you too. I think I just woke up from the budget process.
That's right. It's sort of in a lag, a funk, a post-budget funk. The process again this year, not surprising, was forced through and the dead of night, so to speak, wee hours in the morning, and it's not surprising.
Unfortunately not. It was obviously a flawed system, and we did a little something interesting this year. On each of the budget bills, because some of these bills are literally hundreds of pages long, we get them and are expected to vote on them within the hour, which is absolutely ridiculous. So on each of these budget bills, when they were put up, we put up motions to ask that the vote be delayed by 3 days so that we do what is constitutionally required by having the bills age for 3 days, which gives us and the people of the state of New York plenty of time to look through it and find out what's in there. Unfortunately, the majority decided against it and voted every single one of those motions down, just going along with the governor's messages of necessity to rush this thing through and rush the process through, which is very, very unfortunate.
The devil is always in the details, as the saying goes, and one of the components of the state budget this year was increased funding or maintaining funding for the governor's Startup New York program. And specifically, as it relates to providing additional funding for companies who are producing the Startup New York 30-second, 1-minute ads.
Right. Yeah, it was basically a production credit. In looking through the bill, we found a little nugget that was tucked in there that would offer up to $7 million of production tax credits. So tax credits to production companies producing commercials, which would include the companies that produced the governor's, as we like to call them, the governor's Cuomo promos, the Startup New York commercials that you see throughout the state.
And you brought that up on the Thursday, the day that the budget was passed, Thursday the 31st. So let's go ahead and take a listen to what the Assemblyman had to say about that particular piece of the budget.
Okay, so this is just kind of a rhetorical question, so all of my colleagues just file it under the food for thought category. But so the governor has been running for the past couple of years his commercials through the Empire State Development Program, the Startup New York commercials, and the Open for Business commercials. We have spent tens of millions of dollars of taxpayer dollars running these commercials. And these commercials are supposed to be to entice out-of-state businesses to come to New York. Of course, about 40% of the commercials have actually run in-state, so some have rather affectionately dubbed the commercials as Cuomo promos. So I'm seeing here that perhaps in addition to taxpayers footing the bill for running these commercials, the taxpayers may also be footing the bill to give a commercial production tax credit to the companies who are producing the Cuomo promos. Just a little food for thought. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
So the state will be providing tax credits funding for companies who are producing these Startup New York ads, if you will. But now, in addition to that, the state will be providing $66.5 million for supporting Startup New York advertising.
And by the state, we mean the taxpayers. We're literally, so we're footing the bill to give tax credits, which I get it. They want to bring the production companies here to do their filming here so that they spend their money here. I get that.
Right.
But, to do it for a company that's putting together these commercials, which I believe shouldn't really be running in the state of New York in the first place, I think is just a kind of a slap in the face to the taxpayers when we're giving these tax credits and then spending tens of millions more to air these commercials in state. It makes no sense to me.
And you highlighted that issue on Budget Day, March 31st, so let's go ahead and take a look at that.
There's a section in this bill regarding economic development, and in particular, talking about the $66.5 million that we're putting towards the economic development initiatives and marketing of New York. Now, part of that, $27 million, will be dedicated for tourism promotion services, which I think is fantastic. We should be promoting what we have to offer here in New York, but that leaves about $39.5 million that will be there to utilize with the governor's Open for Business initiative and Global New York. Now, Global New York supports the international domestic trades missions, while the Open for Business initiative supports Startup New York advertising. I think it's really interesting that we just covered last night that already the taxpayers are going to fund the bill for this $39.5 million for the advertising. We're also going to offer up tax credits for the commercial production company who's going to put together the Cuomo promos. But then it goes even further when we're talking about, in the language of the bill, it says, for the Startup New York, provided that in the event funds are used for the purpose of advertising and promoting the benefits of the Startup New York program, no more than 60% of the funds used for such purpose shall be used for advertising and promotion outside of the state of New York. Shouldn't it be a minimum of 60%? It should be spent outside, since the whole point of that promotion is supposed to be bringing companies to the state of New York. Why are we guaranteeing 40% of these promos are going to be running inside the state at taxpayer expense? Especially considering now that we've raised the minimum wage and all our wonderful business climate rankings, I don't think we're going to have a lot of CEOs clamoring to come to New York in the first place. So we could save the taxpayers literally tens of millions of dollars by scrapping that whole Startup New York program. So I'll be voting in the negative.
The purpose of Startup New York is to bring businesses to New York State, in particular big corporations, providing them tax credits for about 10 years or so. But that's to keep the tax base, keep the tax base up there. But also the spending of the Startup New York funding is interesting, because you're spending more in New York State than outside of the state, correct?
Yeah, no, it just doesn't make sense to me. You're running a program that is, the purpose of the program is to attract businesses, bring them to the state of New York with the hopes that they'll stay here and create jobs and all, and that's a wonderful thing. So the first report they did with Startup New York, they've only given us one report, by the way. The second report was due right before the budget came out. We're still waiting for it. It still hasn't come out. But the very first report showed that in the first year or so of Startup New York being there, it created a total of 76 jobs and about $1.7 million in economic activity. Well, they spent $213 million to generate that. I mean, that's a terrible losing wager there. So now we're actually putting language in the budget that says we can't spend more than 60% of the money airing commercials outside of the state of New York. So we're guaranteeing that 40% of that is spent in-state on a commercial designed to attract out-of-state companies.
Out-of-state companies.
This just doesn't make sense to me. And it's at the taxpayer expense. We could scrap this whole thing, put more towards education or maybe tax cuts to small businesses to help them. But instead, we're wasting it on, like I said, we've called it the Cuomo promo, because that seems to be the only purpose of these commercials, is to promote the governor.
Another major component, in addition to Startup New York, that garnered a lot of headlines with the state budget passage on March 31st was, actually it was April 1st, but was the passage of minimum wage, increasing the minimum wage in a tiered system over the next several years to $15 an hour.
Right. It's going to be devastating. It's going to have a devastating impact on small businesses in particular, on our farms, and I don't think people realize on the taxpayers. Because understand, I'll give, for example, the town of Brookhaven. The town of Brookhaven has about 1,500 employees that make under $15 an hour. If they were to impose this directly, immediately, it would be about a $2.2 to $2.4 million hit immediately. We've got a tax cap that the towns and local governments have to live under. So the taxpayers pay all these taxes, and they get these wonderful amenities, great softball fields and volleyball and swimming pools and all. But now, because of this increase in the minimum wage, we might not be able to use these services because we might not have the money available to pay the lifeguards or the umpires or the counselors at the camps or things like this because it would pierce the tax cap. So we're boxing ourselves into the corner. It's going to cause a definite increase in taxes to the taxpayers, but on the private sector side, it's going to be devastating to small businesses.
And you talk about the potential impacts here in New York State, but already negative impacts have been seen out west, and you highlighted that on the floor of the State Assembly. So let's take a look at that, and we'll come back and discuss in further detail with Assemblyman Dean Murray.
And see, this touched real businesses like Abbott's Cellar. One of San Francisco's most buzzed about new Mission restaurants is closing its doors at the end of the month, citing the impending minimum wage hike as its death knell. Apparel manufacturer. This family-run business that contracts to make clothing for a company in San Francisco had to slash staff after Oakland's minimum wage increased. Bacanova, the restaurant. The restaurant servers will no longer receive tips. California Health Institute. In a letter to the New York Times, the owner wrote, "I will be moving my two companies out of Los Angeles when the lease is due to renew." So you say, oh, these are all companies out west. What does it have to do with us? So I reached out to the chambers of commerce throughout my district, and I asked them to please contact some of the businesses and let me hear from them. And I got a lot of feedback, a lot of emails, a lot of letters, a lot of texts. I had one person who didn't identify if they owned a business or anything, but one person said, yeah, I think it's a great idea, we should do it. And then I had all these.
So certainly we'll have to stay tuned and figure out what's going to happen with this ultimate impact from the increase in minimum wage, $15 an hour. But it will possibly have a significant impact on businesses.
Oh, absolutely. In addition to getting the emails and the feedback, I went out and visited many small businesses in my district, and almost to a person, they're just petrified about this. They either don't know how bad the impact is going to be, or there were a handful that said, listen, there's a very good chance I'm going to have to close my doors.
And it's interesting, Assemblyman, because very little, if any, tax breaks will be provided as a result of or tied into this increase in minimum wage. So businesses will suffer. In particular, you've been hearing a lot about the potential negative impacts on non-for-profits because the reimbursement of Medicaid will not be increasing that increase.
Right. Say, for example, direct care aides. The direct care aides are going to have, which, by the way, I believe they should have their salaries increased. But with that said, we're forcing this increase on the not-for-profits without coming with the funding. They're already struggling with how they're going to pay for this. They already have to meet state regulations as far as ratios, patient-to-care ratios. I don't know how they're going to do it, and they don't either.
With about 45 seconds left, there were good aspects to the state budget. Just quickly, if you could go down, just a few, I'll highlight some of those.
Yeah, we did increase funding as far as the heroin epidemic on Long Island.
$25 million. Yeah.
Exactly, so that will definitely come in handy. And then, of course, the state aid to education.
$24 billion.
We increased that, and we eliminated completely the GEA, which all of the school districts were asking us to do, and it was the right thing to do. So that was quite a big number right there that we restored.
And interestingly enough, it's a $155 billion spending plan, but it continues to hold the line on spending at 2%. I don't know how that was possible, but they managed to do that.
I'm not sure either. That's some interesting magic, but again, maybe that's why it was snuck through so quickly.
Always nice to see you, Assemblyman.
You too.
If you'd like to reach out to Assemblyman Dean Murray, you can do so. His contact information is on your screen, 1735 North Ocean Avenue at 631-207-0073. You can email the Assemblyman at murrayd@assembly.state.ny.us. You can also reach out to the Assemblyman on Facebook as well, social media. Thank you very much for joining us today for this edition of Assembly Calendar. Until next time, take care.